On January 7th, or- on January 7th, Tyree Nichols was brutally and senselessly murdered by 5 police officers. 2 days ago, I saw the footage of this terrible assault. I was terrified by the video, yet morbidly unsurprised by the level of violence that humans inflict upon each other. Ever since the fall, violence and injustice have been ever present in the world, living and working in the hearts of man. With lives so often filled with pain, we often have the need to show forgiveness, but we struggle with it. Forgiveness is difficult to give. Thankfully, the Bible's pages are filled with stories of forgiveness and redemption, but there are a few stories like Joseph's. The youngest of 11 brothers, Joseph was his father's favorite son. He was given special treatment, and Israel had an ornate robe made for him. His brothers were envious of their father's love for Joseph and despised him with every fiber of their being. Joseph's amazing gift of deciphering dreams would only make things worse. Genesis 37, 5 through 10. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bound down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he said. Then he had another dream, and he had told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" The brothers threw Joseph into a pit until they spared him and sold him into slavery instead. Brought into Egypt, Joseph faced many trials, such as being accused of forcing himself upon Potiphar's wife and being imprisoned for it. However, he didn't lose focus on God's plan, and in the end, it was fulfilled. Years later, when he was given great power as a reward for serving Pharaoh, his brothers traveled to Egypt to collect food, for a severe drought had arrived. Upon seeing his brothers again, Joseph couldn't contain the emotions he felt inside. Despite everything they had done to him, he felt no wrath and anger. All he wanted to do was hug them. Genesis 45, 1 through 8. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt." Through Joseph's brothers and Joseph's personal trials, God had used him to save an entire nation. If Joseph's brothers never sold him into slavery, he wouldn't have been brought into Egypt. If they hadn't spared him and his brothers killed him instead, he would have never fulfilled God's plan. Not only that, but the hardships Joseph had endured forged him in fire, making him greater than he was before. Genesis 41, 41 through 47. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphnath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. God used Joseph's tears to grow flowers. But the question is, why should we forgive? Would forgiving people truly be worth it? Think about Joseph. Instead of dwelling on his feelings of anger and resentment towards his brothers, he instead meditated on the word and teachings of God, which got him through his hardships. What does this mean for us? We must remember that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Romans 3:28. And God has forgiven us through Jesus. Because he is able to forgive us despite our betrayal, then we need to forgive each other when we betray one another. Colossians 3:12-14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. One of the 10 commandments is to love your neighbor. Jesus said not only love your neighbor, but to love your enemies as well. One of the things about love is that it is unconditional, despite mistakes. If you forgive your neighbor their mistakes, then you should forgive your enemies as well. Matthew 5:21-24. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fires of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Ephesians 4:26-27. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. Do not give the devil a foothold. Lingering on feelings of anger and vengeance allows Satan to creep in, sinking into the cracks of your mind. He will create feelings of arrogance and resentment, convincing you not to let go of the past. Those feelings have to be dealt with before you can properly forgive someone, or your acceptance of that apology will be in vain. Proverbs 19:11. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is glory to overlook an offense. Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take vengeance or bear grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Getting back at someone doesn't create equality or balance, but instead creates unrest. Only God takes vengeance when vengeance is required. When people attempt to take justice into their own hands, they are making themselves the judge, placing themselves above God. In the end, vengeance leaves everyone hurt. So as we end here today, ask yourself, am I holding a grudge? Has someone wronged me? If they have, forgive them of their transgressions against you, and love them as you would God and your family. Because isn't that what Jesus did? Luke 32:34. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Jesus didn't just forgive people of their sins, but he forgave the very people that were killing him. We follow Jesus Christ, the man who taught us to love all. He forgave us, so now it is our turn to forgive others. If you have any needs, come forward now as we stand.